Zoe Johnson, in my office. Now. The words landed like a slap in the marble lobby of the Grand Astoria Hotel, where crystal chandeliers hung like judgment, and the floor gleamed with polished indifference. Heads turned. Bellboys froze mid-stride. A guest paused, mid-sip of her overpriced espresso. And Zoe. She stood still, phone still warm in her palm, heart still caught in the final syllables of fluent Dutch. She had answered it instinctively, stepping behind a column to shield herself from sight, as if discretion would save her. It never had. The call had been from the University of Amsterdam. After 6 years of rejection letters, someone had finally called her back. But she barely had time to breathe in the word congratulations, before the voice of manager Richards pierced the air. That voice had always carried a specific weight, the kind that didn't just command attention, but demanded submission. And for 6 years, Zoe had complied. She scrubbed the penthouse bathtubs of people who never made eye contact. She smiled as receptionists took smoke breaks during rush hour. She folded towels with the precision of a surgeon, then watched her ideas be laughed at during weekly meetings where she wasn't even supposed to speak. But that day, she had answered a call in Dutch. And that was unforgivable. In the basement-level office, the scent of bleach clung to every surface, battling the stench of power gone stale. Richards didn't sit. She didn't have to. Zoe stood there like a child summoned by the principal, hands clasped, uniform pressed, eyes unwavering. "You know the rules," Richards snapped, slamming a file onto the desk with theatrical flair. "No phones. Especially not in the lobby." And what was that French? "Dutch," Zoe said before she could stop herself. "Wrong move." Richards' lips curled into a smile. The kind of smile only people in power wear when they find an excuse to punish someone they already resented. "Well, good. You'll have plenty of time to practice your Dutch cleaning the convention center bathrooms for the next 3 months. You'll be on double shift, no overtime, of course. Maybe keep your linguistic brilliance to yourself next time, Zoe didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply nodded and walked out of the office with her dignity wrapped tight around her like armor. But inside, something cracked. Not from the punishment, she was used to that. It was the look Richards gave her as she spoke, amusement. As if Zoe's intelligence was a personal offense. As if her ability to speak 6 languages was not an asset but a threat. That night, Zoe sat on the edge of her shared bed in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, the hum of traffic outside masking her silence. Her roommates, both night shift nurses, were already asleep, their exhaustion as heavy as her own. On the wall above her desk, 6 certificates hung in cheap plastic frames. English, French, Dutch, Mandarin, Italian, Arabic. Each one a small rebellion against the world's assumption that a black maid couldn't also be a scholar. She stared at her Georgetown diploma, honors in applied linguistics, and wondered how it had come to this. 6 years. 47 job applications. 12 internal transfer requests. All ignored. Because once they saw the cleaning uniform, they stopped seeing her. The next morning, she reported to her new station early. She cleaned vomit off the conference center floor without flinching. She replaced toiletries, while corporate execs in $1,000 suits walked past her like she didn't exist. She smiled. She nodded. She endured. Until the front desk phone rang. Zoe Johnson. The head receptionist called out across the lobby. "HR wants to see you. Top floor." Zoe blinked. The top floor, the executive offices. That wasn't just a different floor, it was another world. Maids didn't go there. Not unless they were being fired. She stepped into the elevator with shaky hands, surrounded by executives discussing mergers, IPOs, and quarterly bonuses. No one looked at her. She was still invisible. But not for long. "Please sit," the HR director said, motioning toward the leather chair. She didn't smile. She didn't offer coffee. Just handed Zoe a manila folder with her name typed neatly on the front. "Mr. Coleman wants to speak with you, personally." Zoe's mouth went dry. Richard Coleman, billionaire, owner of the Grand Astoria chain, the man whose name was whispered like a god's, wanted to speak to her? About what? Before she could ask, the director was already leading her down a sunlit hallway lined with glass offices and oil paintings. At the end stood a door taller than any she'd ever seen, bearing only 2 words in gold. Richard Coleman. Inside, the air smelled like leather, ambition, and something ancient, the kind of old money that doesn't apologize. Coleman stood by the window, hands behind his back, watching the city move beneath him. When he turned, Zoe expected scrutiny. Or skepticism. What she didn't expect was curiosity. "Dutch, French, Mandarin, and Italian, correct?" he asked, flipping open the file. Zoe hesitated. "Yes." And Arabic. He nodded. Honors degree from Georgetown. 6 international certifications. Cleaning bathrooms at my hotel for 6 years. Zoe felt the flush rise in her neck. I applied. Dozens of times. No one ever. I know, Coleman interrupted. I checked. She blinked. I heard you yesterday, he said. Dutch, flawless accent. Then I asked for your file. He sat across from her now, his eyes piercing through every layer of armor she'd built to survive this job. Tell me, Miss Johnson. Why are you here? Zoe didn't know what answer he wanted. But she gave him the only one that mattered. Because no one ever saw me. Coleman's face didn't change. But something shifted. I need someone who speaks Dutch and Mandarin, he said. Tomorrow, we're hosting a high-stakes trade conference. The original translations we outsourced are riddled with errors, some of which could cause diplomatic disasters. Zoe nodded, unsure where this was going. I want you to be our international coordinator, effective immediately, temporary for now, $5,000 a week. Zoe's breath caught. Excuse me? You're overqualified. You've been ignored. And based on what I've uncovered this week, there may be others like you. He closed the folder, and with it, every excuse anyone had ever used to keep her small. Welcome to the top floor, Miss Johnson. The hallway looked different on the way back. Maybe it was the badge now clipped to Zoe's lapel, International Relations Coordinator, in embossed lettering. Or maybe it was the way her footsteps no longer echoed with hesitation, but with something close to purpose. She passed the same executives in the elevator, but this time, she didn't look down. One of them, a young VP, did a double take. His eyes scanned her badge, then flicked away like static. He didn't speak. They never did. But as the elevator doors opened on the HR floor, someone else was waiting. Manager Richards. In her crisp navy blazer, arms folded, face frozen in a smirk that hadn't yet registered what the badge meant. Johnson, she snapped, like it was still yesterday. What are you doing up here without a uniform? Zoe didn't pause. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at her. Working, she replied flatly. At Mr. Coleman's request. The smirk vanished. Richard's eyes dropped to the badge. Then widened. Then narrowed. This is some kind of correction. Zoe cut in, her voice calm, professional. Georgetown honors. Fluent in 6 languages. 12 denied transfer requests. 47 ignored applications. My resume's been in your system for 6 years. She let the silence hang in the air. Then walked past Richards without waiting for permission because for the first time, she didn't need it. Zoe spent the rest of the day deep in the executive wing, prepping for a conference that could make or break Coleman's international expansion plans. Dutch and Chinese executives were flying in from Amsterdam, Shanghai, and Beijing. Contracts worth tens of millions were on the line. And the welcome materials? A disaster. Zoe flipped through the Mandarin brochures and felt her stomach twist. It wasn't just poor translation, it was offensive. Cultural missteps. Sloppy phrasing. Words that could insult without meaning to. Someone had translated them with Google and Audacity. She began correcting them by hand, then built a new packet from scratch. Cross-checked tones, restructured formality levels, annotated historical sensitivities. She worked straight through lunch. At some point, someone set a sandwich and tea beside her. She didn't look up. Hours later, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway. How did you know those were wrong? She turned. Richard Coleman stood there, arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable curiosity. The original translation used phrasing that's inappropriate in formal Chinese business, Zoe said. It implies condescension. And this, she held up another page, accidentally references a term associated with imperialism. It's offensive to a mainland Chinese delegation. Coleman nodded slowly. Whitmore said the translations cost us 50 grand. Zoe didn't look up. Then Whitmore was either lied to, or lying. Coleman gave the smallest smile. That's what I'm trying to figure out. The next morning, Zoe walked into the grand ballroom wearing a tailored blazer, her new badge, and 6 years of restraint buttoned into every word she didn't say. The air buzzed with tense excitement. Dutch and Chinese delegates mingled over espresso and translation headsets. Zoe moved between them like silk switching from Mandarin to Dutch to English with fluid precision. She answered cultural questions before they were asked. Anticipated faux pas. Rescued conversations teetering toward offense. By noon, she'd brokered 2 informal commitments worth $18 million. By 3 p.m., she was the most talked about person in the room. And that's when he showed up. Thomas Whitmore, Director of Operations. Architect of her invisibility. The man who had blocked every one of her transfer requests with the same 3 words. Not a fit. Now he stood before her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Johnson," he said, as if they hadn't shared 6 years of silence. "Impressive work today." Zoe turned to face him fully. "Thank you. It's impressive how my resume, listing Mandarin fluency, was missed, especially when we spent $50,000 on inadequate translations." Whitmore's jaw ticked. "There must have been a mistake. I received red receipts on every email I ever sent," Zoe said evenly, "including the one last year, warning about incorrect Cantonese phrasing in the trade summit packet." "You replied, 'Noted.' Then reassigned me to laundry." The smile vanished. For a moment, Whitmore looked like a man struggling to remember whether he was still in control. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Zoe didn't wait for an answer. She had somewhere to be. Later that night, as Zoe reviewed final materials in the executive prep room, her phone buzzed. It was Zoe Williams, the young recruitment analyst from HR. She sounded breathless. "You were right," she whispered. I dug deeper. "The translation firm we used? It belongs to Whitmore's niece. No official certification. No experience. All the payments went through his discretionary spending account." Zoe sat in silence. "There's more," Williams continued. "I pulled 5 years of hiring data. Over 80% of non-white internal candidates were denied promotions or transfers. Especially black women. There's a pattern. A system." Zoe stared at the ceiling. "You have all of it?" she asked. "Everything. Emails. Invoices. Contract renewals." A pause. "Why now?" Zoe finally asked. "Because," Zoe Williams answered without hesitation. "Because I saw your file on my first week and couldn't believe you were cleaning toilets. Because I knew something was wrong. And because you showed me it was okay to say it out loud." Zoe said nothing, but a storm had already begun behind her eyes. The next morning, the air inside the Grand Astoria pulsed with tension. The conference was entering its second day. Smiles were tighter, the stakes were higher. And while the ballroom glittered with glass and diplomacy, something darker brewed just beneath the surface. Zoe could feel it. She stood by the concierge desk reviewing updated agenda packets when a voice sliced through the buzz behind her. "Excuse me, Miss Johnson?" She turned. A young Chinese executive, impeccably dressed, held out a folder. "I believe this belongs to you. I found it on a table in the lounge." Zoe accepted it, frowning. It was the translation master document. The one she'd finalized yesterday. She hadn't left it anywhere. She flipped it open. And froze. The corrections were gone. In their place were the original, error-ridden translations, the same ones she had warned about. The ones that, if used, could cause cultural offense serious enough to derail the entire summit. Her name was still on the document. Someone had switched them. Her mind moved in sharp fragments. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. Within minutes, she was in Coleman's office. He was already there, pacing. "You saw the new draft?" she asked. "I did. It's sabotage." He nodded. "Agreed." She laid the original and forged version side by side on his desk. "Someone's trying to discredit me. Make it look like I submitted incorrect translations. Possibly to kill the conference. Possibly to get me fired. Oli dash. Or," Coleman said quietly, "to hide the fact that those translations were always wrong and that we've been paying premium rates to someone who doesn't know what they're doing." Zoe hesitated. Then she slid her phone across the desk. "I have proof," she said. On the screen. Screenshots of contract invoices, side by side. Comparisons of translation errors. And a detailed email trail. Whitmore's niece. The payments. The misrepresentation. Everything. But that wasn't the only card she had to play. Zoe reached into her blazer and pulled out a slim digital recorder. "For the last 48 hours, she said, "I've been recording every hallway conversation, every threat, every attempt to intimidate or redirect me. Including Richards telling another staff member that a maid pretending to be management won't last long." Coleman's eyes darkened. "And Whitmore?" "Called me nobody. Told someone in logistics to erase the maid's fingerprints from this event before she ruins the brand." Silence. Then Coleman sat down and dialed his assistant. "Clear my schedule," he said coldly. "Call an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Every regional manager. Full attendance." He hung up. Then looked at Zoe. "You ready to bring this down?" The boardroom looked like a courtroom. Long mahogany table. Leather chairs. Half a dozen nameplates for executives who'd built careers by never asking questions. A projector flickered silently on the wall, waiting for the storm. Zoe stood to the side, holding nothing but the original file folder and her voice. Coleman entered last. Behind him, Richards and Whitmore, neither of them had been told the nature of the meeting. They walked in smiling. The smiles didn't last. Coleman started with numbers. Cold. Clinical. He showed charts comparing translated contract losses. Guest satisfaction drops linked to language mishandlings. Conference delays caused by miscommunications. Then he brought up Zoe. She's been cleaning our bathrooms for 6 years. With an honors degree from Georgetown. Fluent in 6 languages. Rejected 12 times for internal transfers. Over 40 job applications ignored. Gasps rippled through the room. Then the screens changed. Side-by-side comparisons of Zoe's corrected Mandarin translations and the altered versions submitted this morning. 2 hours ago, Coleman said, someone swapped these. Whitmore stiffened. Richards paled. Miss Johnson caught the switch. She also caught this. The audio recording began to play. First, Whitmore's voice, bitter and dismissive. You're nobody, a cleaning lady who thinks she belongs in boardrooms. Then, Richards' condescending tone, whispering to a colleague. Let her enjoy her little promotion. She'll be back on her knees by next week. Then a pause, followed by Coleman's voice, steady and final. The niece of Thomas Whitmore, our director of operations, received over $200,000 in translation contracts without valid credentials. Multiple certified candidates were passed over. Qualified employees of color, especially women, were consistently rejected. Then came the hiring data. Slide after slide of demographic bias. The room grew cold. Then Coleman looked at Whitmore. You have 5 minutes to explain. Whitmore opened his mouth. But Zoe beat him to it. She was never qualified, she said evenly. And yet she represented this company to foreign clients while I cleaned rooms. When I spoke up, I was punished. Every time. Whitmore tried to laugh, but it cracked in his throat. We hired the best translators available. You hired family, Zoe cut in. With fake credentials. Who charged triple the going rate. No. Then she placed one final document on the table. A written statement from Peking University. Ashley Whitmore was never certified. The room was silent. Dead silent. Then Coleman stood. Effective immediately, Thomas Whitmore is terminated for cause. Sarah Richards is suspended pending further investigation. A full audit of all hiring and promotional practices will begin today. He paused, then turned to Zoe. And Miss Johnson is being promoted to Director of Global Talent Access and Inclusion. With full authority to review and reform our internal hiring systems. Her first initiative, the Invisible Talent Program, will launch company-wide within the next 30 days. That night, Zoe sat alone in her new office overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline she had once wiped from windows in silence. Now it belonged to her. Her phone buzzed. It was Zoe Williams from HR. Thought you should know, she said, almost laughing. Whitmore tried to get his niece a last-minute certification to cover his tracks. Too late. She's been banned from bidding on contracts with us for life. Zoe closed her eyes. Not to rest, but to remember every staircase she had scrubbed. Every silence she had swallowed. Every door that had slammed shut on her potential. She remembered them all. Because now, she was the one with the key. 6 months later, the Grand Astoria looked different. Not on the surface, the marble still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled like polite lies. But something underneath had shifted. There were new faces at the front desk, in logistics, in the back offices. Different accents, different skin tones, different names on the door plates. It was subtle, but real. And at the center of it all stood Zoe Johnson. No longer invisible. No longer apologizing. She stood behind the podium in the grand ballroom, facing rows of regional managers, executives, and team leads flown in from properties across the country. A large screen behind her read. Invisible talent, recognize, elevate, rebuild. This isn't just about me, Zoe began, her voice calm, steady, resonant. It never was. She didn't speak like a woman delivering a victory speech. She spoke like someone who had waited too long to be heard, and now refused to waste a single word. For years, she continued, we hired based on surface, on last names, on accents, on comfort. We claimed to value diversity, but when brilliance wore a cleaning uniform, we turned away. When fluency came with an immigrant surname, we doubted. And when leadership came from a woman who didn't fit the mold, we ignored her. A quiet rustle in the audience. Executive shifting, eyes lowered. Zoe didn't flinch. I was hired to clean your mirrors, she said, voice soft but sharp. And in doing so, I saw who we really were. But I also saw who we could be. She paused, then nodded to the back of the room. From the shadows, a teenage girl stood and walked slowly to the stage. The audience whispered. "This is Alicia," Zoe said. "Daughter of Rosa Morales. Rosa cleaned rooms here for 22 years. Her dream was for Alicia to become the first in her family to go to college." Zoe handed Alicia a blue folder. She just received the first full scholarship from the Coleman Foundation for Inclusive Language Education. Applause erupted. Alicia blinked back tears. So did Rosa, standing near the kitchen doors in her housekeeping uniform. Zoe stepped back from the podium. And Richard Coleman took her place. He looked older now, not physically, but in the eyes. Like someone who had finally seen what privilege had kept hidden. "I built this company on the idea that luxury meant perfection," he said quietly. "But I never asked who got to define that perfection." He turned to face Zoe. "And she reminded me." Then to the audience. "And she changed everything." Outside the ballroom, Sarah Richards watched the live stream on her tablet. She sat in the lounge of a modest hotel in Fresno, where she now worked as a shift supervisor. After her suspension, she'd avoided termination by cooperating with the internal investigation. But the days of barking orders from penthouse lobbies were long gone. She was back where she had started. Only now, she knew how many voices she had silenced and how few second chances the world gave to people like Zoe. She didn't touch her coffee. Just watched the girl on stage. And for the first time, said nothing. Thomas Whitmore had fared worse. The headlines had followed him for weeks. Nepotism scandal at Grand Astoria, luxury chain rocked by discrimination report, top executive fired amid translation fraud. His niece Ashley had been forced to repay nearly $80,000 in misappropriated contracts, and was now, ironically, enrolled in an entry-level Mandarin course, funded by the same scholarship initiative Zoe had launched. Whitmore? Last anyone heard, he was managing overnight security at a roadside motel outside Flagstaff. The man who once decided who was a fit, now handed out room keys to truckers at midnight. Back in New York, Zoe's days looked different. She spent mornings reviewing multilingual hiring pipelines, afternoons interviewing invisible talents hidden in linen closets and kitchens, and evenings mentoring candidates through Coleman's new inclusion program. She still wore heels from the discount rack. Still brought her own lunch in a reused yogurt container. Still knew the names of every janitor on her floor. But now, when she walked into a room, people stood. When she spoke, people listened. And when she smiled, they understood that something bigger had begun. One night, long after the offices had emptied, Zoe stayed late reviewing applicant files. The light of her computer flickered softly as rain tapped on the windows. She glanced at a familiar email header. Application number 48, internal transfer request. Her original request, the first one she ever sent. She clicked it open. It was short, polite, excessively qualified. Never answered. Zoe stared at it for a long moment. Then pressed forward. She added one line. "This is what was buried. Let's make sure it never happens again." Then she clicked send. 2 weeks later, at a leadership summit in Chicago, Zoe was approached by a nervous man in a bellhop uniform. "Miss Johnson?" he asked, eyes wide. I saw the video. Your speech, I wanted to say, thank you." Zoe tilted her hill. "For what?" He swallowed. "For proving someone like me can be seen. That maybe. I'm not invisible." Zoe reached into her blazer and pulled out a small card. It read, "Invisible Talent Referral. Fast Track Application. Apply," she said. "Let me know when you're ready." As she walked away, he stood holding the card like it was a passport. Because maybe it was. Zoe Johnson never became a celebrity. She didn't need to. Her name wouldn't trend. Her face wouldn't end up on magazine covers. But across the country, in quiet hallways and back offices, her story was whispered like a secret spell. The woman who spoke 6 languages. The maid who dismantled a machine. The one they laughed at. Until the billionaire heard her. And listened.